Welcome class 12th. Here I am going to conclude chapter 4, the enemy from your Vistas book. Let's now start the chapter. Dear children, in the previous part of the story, you've come to know that Dr. Sadao was assured by the army journal of his country to send the assassins to remove the enemy from his house. But nobody came. Sadao waited helplessly for 3 consecutive nights for the arrival of the assassins. But nobody came. Finally, he devised a plan to get rid of the man. Let's see what Dr. Sadao is doing. He went into the guest room that night before he went to bed himself and checked carefully the American's temperature, the state of the wound, and his heart and pulse. The pulse was irregular, but that was perhaps because of excitement. The young man's pale lips were pressed together and his eyes burnt. Only the scars on his neck were red. Pulse means heartbeat. That night, before going to bed, Sadao visited his guest room. There, he had the thorough checking of the American. He checked carefully his body temperature, the condition of his wound, also his heart and his pulse beat. He found his heartbeat was quite unsteady. It may be due to the excitement and the planning as he was about to leave their home. He found that the man's pale lips were pressed together and his eyes were burning with the fire. That means the doctor observed the feelings of hatred in the expressions and even in the eyes of the enemy. Next, he observed that the scars on his neck were still red in color. He concluded it would take time of the healing of these marks over the neck. I realize you are saving my life again, he told Sadao. Not at all, Sadao said. It is only inconvenient to have you here any longer. Inconvenient, that means uncomfortable. However, the young man told Sadao that he was saving his life once again. To this, Sadao replied, it was not like that. In fact, he was sending him away because it had turned to be quite uncomfortable for him to keep him more any longer in his house. He had hesitated a good deal about giving the man a flashlight, but he decided to give it to him. After all, it was a small one, his own, which he used at night when he was called. Hesitated, that means to be reluctant or to take the pause before saying or doing something. So here it is said, though Sadao was quite reluctant to give his torch to the man, as he felt if the man could not use it wisely, he could be spotted and land himself into the trouble. But finally, he decided to give his personal torch to the man. This was the torch that he used when he had to attend his patients during the nights. If your food runs out before you catch a boat, he said, signal me 2 flashes. At the same instant, the sun drops over the horizon. Don't signal in darkness, for it will be seen. If you are all right but still there, signal me once. You will find fresh fish easy to catch, but you must eat them raw. A fire would be seen. Okay, the young man breathed. Run out means finishing. Sun drops, that means sun setting. Horizon is the line where the earth's surface and the sky appear to meet. That is the skyline. Raw, that means uncooked. While giving the man his personal thoughts, Sadhu instructed the man that if his stock of food would finish before finding the Korean fishing boat, he could signal him by two flashes of the torch at the sun setting time. He asked him to be careful not to signal when there was complete darkness because light could be easily visible and detected in the dark as compared to the sun setting time. He suggested the man not to use the flashlight during the night, as in the darkness his flashlight could be easily detected and found by the Japanese army. So he advised him to make the signal only during the sun setting time with this torchlight. Then he gave him another suggestion that if the man would find the fish in the sea near the island, then he had to eat it in the raw condition, as the fire of the cooking would be easily detected by the army of his country, and thus he would put his life in danger. The man took a long breath on hearing the instruction and replied, okay, he would do the same. He was dressed now in the Japanese clothes which Sadhu had given him, and at the last moment Sadhu wrapped a black cloth about his blonde head. So here it is said, after giving the instruction, the enemy was dressed in the traditional Japanese clothes which were given by the doctor to him. But at the final moment, Sadhu wrapped a black cloth around his blonde hair. He did it to hide the golden colored hair of that American so that he could not be detected by anyone in his country. Now, Sadhu said, the young American, without a word, shook Sadhu's hand warmly and then walked quite well across the floor and down the step into the darkness of the garden. Once, twice, Sadhu saw his light flash to find his way, but that would not be suspected. He waited until from the shore there was one more flash. Then he closed the partition. That night he slept. Suspected, that means to be doubtful. The American was looking quite different in the traditional Japanese dress. Sadhu was satisfied to have this changed appearance of the man. Then the young American, without saying any single word, shook his hands warmly with the doctor and then walked quietly across the floor and then moved down the steps and disappeared into the darkness of the garden. He used the torch once or twice to make his way, but Sadhu was satisfied as the army could not doubt about that. Sadhu watched and waited till he saw the torchlight once again as the man would be boarding the boat. Then Sadhu closed the door of the partition and slept well that night, as finally he had got rid of the enemy from his house. You say the man escaped? The journal asks faintly. He had been operated upon a week before, an emergency operation to which Sadhu had been called in the night For 12 hours, Sadao had not been sure the journal would live. After the operation, the condition of the army journal got very much critical. And for the next 12 hours, the doctor was not sure whether he would survive or not. The gallbladder was much involved. Gallbladder is the organ attached to the liver in which bile is stored. As the illness of the journal was concerned with his gallbladder, that's why he was very critical, as they had operated upon his gallbladder. That's why his condition got worse. Then the old man had begun to breathe deeply again and to demand food. Sadao had not been able to ask about the assassins so far as he knew they had never come. Assassins, that means killers. It is informed here in the story that 7 days had passed after the operation of the old army journal. Now gradually the old man started recovering. He once again started breathing now deeply, and he also started demanding for the food. That was a good symptom of the recovery of the army journal. This moment, Sadao did not have the courage to ask the army journal about the professional killers that he had promised to send to his home to kill the American man. In fact, Sadao knew it very clearly. The killers had never turned up ever in his house. The servants had returned, and Yumi had cleaned the guest room thoroughly and had burnt sulfur in it to get the white man smell out of it. Nobody said anything. Only the gardener was cross because he had got behind with his chrysanthemums. Sulfur is a chemical element used as a disinfectant. Cross, that means angry or disappointed. Chrysanthemum, it is a kind of the flower found in Japan. It is mentioned that after the departure of the enemy from Dr. Sadao's house, now everything returned to be normal. All his servants returned back to their work. Even his maid servant, Yumi, she burned the sulfur to disinfect the rooms of his house. She wanted to disinfect the room to get rid of the smell of the American man. In fact, this was a process followed by the Japanese people to disinfect and purify their houses. So Yumi, she burned the sulfur in all the rooms to get rid the smell of the enemy from their house. But no servant spoke any word about the enemy. Only their home servant, gardener, was annoyed. It was only due to his plantation. He was getting late to plant the special Japanese flower, and the season was getting over. But after a week, Sadao felt the journal was well enough to be spoken to about the prisoner. Yes, Excellency, he escaped, Sadao now said. He coughed, signifying that he had not said all he might have said, but was unwilling to disturb the journal further. But the old man opened his eyes suddenly. Here it is explained, after the period of 1 week, Sadao felt that the journal was well enough, so it was the good time to discuss about the prisoner of war with him. Sadao informed him that the man had escaped. After saying this, Sadao coughed, which indicated he was thinking he should not tell everything now that could disturb the condition of the army journal. He did not want to get worsen his condition. But the army journal suddenly reminded of his promise and he opened his eyes. That prisoner, he said with some energy, did I not promise you I would kill him for you? Now, army journal abruptly opened his eyes to hear this information about the American man. He asked Sadao if he had not promised with him to get that man killed by his personal professional killers. You did, Excellency, Sadao said. Well, the old man said in a tone of amazement. So I did. But you see, I was suffering a good deal. The truth is, I thought of nothing but myself. In short, I forgot my promise to you. Now the doctor replied back. It was really promised by the army journal to kill the enemy. But the old man replied in the tone of surprise to the doctor. He really had got rid of the man from his home, but he regretted that he thought nothing. I wondered, Your Excellency, Sadao murmured. It was certainly very careless of me, the journal said. But you understand, it was not lack of patriotism or dereliction of duty. He looked anxiously at his doctor. If the matter should come out, you would understand that, wouldn't you? Patriotism, that means love for one's country. Dereliction, that means failure to perform one's duty. Sadao spoke softly. He said that he was also wondering how the army journal, who had been so responsible, could forget about his promise. However, the army journal felt sorry that he had been so careless, but he further added that it was neither the lack of his love for his country nor he was shirking from his duty. Then he looked at the doctor with excitement. Now, army journal was looking forward to seek the support of this doctor. He looked anxiously towards the doctor. He wanted that the doctor should understand about his problem and about his illness and should not disclose this to anyone in the world. However, the journal wanted that his mistake and carelessness should not be disclosed to the world. He wanted no one should come to know about the carelessness on his part. Certainly, Your Excellency, Sadao said. He suddenly comprehended that the journal was in the palm of his hand and that as a consequence he himself was perfectly safe. Comprehended, that means understand. Consequence, that means as a result. However, the doctor sympathized with the illness of the army journal. He understood right now that the journal was in his control, and as a result, now nobody could come to know about the sin of this doctor, and thus his own life was safe. I can swear to your loyalty, Excellency, he said to the old journal, and to your zeal against the enemy. Zeal, that means great energy or enthusiasm. Excellency and Your Excellences are the titles used for the persons who are at the important official positions. Now, Sadao started flattering the army journal. He said that nobody could doubt about the dedication and loyalty of the journal. Even he could also swear about his loyalty, and he had the full faith about his excitement to fight against the enemy. So he assured the journal that he was not going to leak this information to anyone in the world. You are a good man, the journal murmured and closed his eyes. You will be rewarded. Hence, the journal was much relaxed to get the assurance from the doctor. He praised the doctor to be a good man. Then he closed his eyes, now getting assurance from the doctor not to leak the negligence of the journal about the enemy. The journal declared he was going to honor the doctor for his goodness. But Sadao, searching the spot of black in the twilighted sea, that night had his reward. There was no prick of light in the dusk. No one was on the island. His prisoner was gone, safe, doubtless, for he had warned him to wait only for a Korean fishing boat. Twilighted, that is the sun setting or sun rising time. Prick, that means the sharp point. Dusk is the sun setting time. However, it is now informed that at the sun setting time, so thou got his reward. When he looked towards the island, he found no trace of flashlight in the twilighted sea. This meant the American had gone away. He understood that the enemy would have got the Korean fishing boat and had gone safely back to his own country. He did not doubt if he had not found the flashlight signal in the sky. He had instructed the enemy to wait for the Korean fishing boat and then go safely in his country. He would have done the same. He stood for a moment on the veranda, gazing out to the sea from whence the young man had come that other night. Here in the concluding lines, it is said, now Sadao stood in his veranda and started recollecting the past events. He started looking at the sea from where the enemy had come that night. And into his mind, although without reason, there came other white faces he had known. The professor at whose house he had met Hannah, a dull man, and his wife had been a silly talkative woman, in spite of her wish to be kind. He remembered his old teacher of anatomy who had been so insistent on mercy with the knife, and then he remembered the face of his fat and slatternly landlady. He had had great difficulty in finding a place to live in America because he was a Japanese. Anatomy is the branch of science that is concerned with the human body structure. Slatternly, that means dirty or untidy. Standing in his veranda, Sadao had flashbacks of all the Americans whom he had met in his life. First came the face of the dull professor at whose house he had met his wife Hannah. Then he remembered the face of the professor's silly talkative wife, who always seemed to be very kind. Then appeared the face of his anatomy teacher, who had taught them to cut open the body with a knife. After this, he remembered the face of the fat, untidy landlady of his house. Being a Japanese, Dr. Sadao had to face many problems to get the accommodation in America. The Americans were full of prejudice, and it had been better to live in it. Knowing himself their superior, how he had despised the ignorant and dirty old woman who had at last consented to house him in her miserable home. Prejudice, that means preconceived idea or opinion. Despise, that is a feeling of strong dislike. Hereby, Sadhu remembered clearly how he hated living there in America, knowing that the Americans were full of prejudice. They were full of the past opinion against the other Asian people. They considered themselves to be superior and treated the Asian people like Japanese to be the inferior ones. Even Sadhu disliked the dirty old woman who finally agreed to let him live in her home. That was in a really bad condition. He had once tried to be grateful to her because she had, in his last year, nursed him through influenza. Nursed, that means to take care of. Influenza, that is a highly contagious viral infection of the respiratory passages that cause a fever. However, Sadhu here reminded that he was only once obliged to that lady because she had taken care of Sadhu when he was struck by the viral fever during the last year of his stay in America. But it was difficult, for she was no less repulsive to him in her kindness. Now he remembered the youthful, haggard face of his prisoner, white and repulsive. Repulsive is the feeling of strong dislike. Haggard, that means looking tired, lean and thin. However, Sadhu confessed it was difficult for him to be thankful to the lady for her help in his illness, as while treating him, there was the expression of dislike and hatred in the treatment of the lady. Now he clearly remembered the youthful, exhausted face of the prisoner of war that was also white and full of hatred, just like the other Americans. Strange, he thought, I wonder why I could not kill him. Hence, while remembering the faces of all the Americans and their treatments, Sadhu right now tried to resemble their faces with the prisoner of war. He was surprised why he could not kill the young man who was like other white people, full of prejudice and repulsive feelings. He cursed himself why he could not kill the prisoner of war who was the enemy of their country. I hope you have well understood the explanation. Thank you for watching the video.